The accidental proposal. The summit beginning. Marcus Chin had prepared for this moment for 18 months. Every detail of Valerian culture had been memorized, every protocol practiced until it became second nature. As a xenocultural specialist for the Human Diplomatic Corps, his job was to prevent exactly the kind of catastrophic misunderstandings that could derail the most important peace summit in human history. The observation deck of Station Harmony stretched before him like a crystal cathedral. Transparent aluminum walls revealed the endless darkness of space, punctuated by distant stars that seemed to watch the proceedings with ancient indifference. Inside, representatives from 40 human colonies mingled carefully with the Valerian delegation, their movements choreographed by centuries of diplomatic tradition from both species. Marcus stood near the refreshment area, his tablet displaying real-time cultural notes. The Valorians were a remarkable species, humanoid in basic structure but distinctly alien in their physiology. Their skin held an opalescent quality, shifting through subtle color gradients that Marcus had learned to read like an emotional barometer. Pale blue indicated calm formality. Deeper blue suggested concentration. The warmer tones, gold, amber, rose, those were rarely seen in public. Those colors meant genuine emotion, something Valorians considered deeply private. Remember, his supervisor Director Williams had told him during the final briefing, the Valorians value emotional control above almost everything else. Their society is built on hierarchy, formality, and restraint. Show respect, maintain professional distance, and for God's sake, don't be too friendly. They interpret overt friendliness as either deception or weakness. Marcus had nodded, taking careful notes. He understood the stakes. Humanity had been expanding into the galaxy for only 70 years. The Valerian Empire had controlled this sector for millennia. This summit represented humanity's first real opportunity for a formal alliance with a major galactic power. Everything had to be perfect. The Valerian delegation began to arrive at precisely the appointed hour. Their concept of time was rigid. Punctuality wasn't just valued, it was considered a moral virtue. They moved in perfect formation, their flowing robes designed to emphasize grace and controlled movement. Each delegation member's rank was displayed through subtle variations in clothing color and the intricate patterns woven into their garments. Marcus watched them process through the room, noting how other attendees stepped back to provide appropriate space. The Valorians didn't merely walk, they performed formality with every gesture. Their greetings consisted of precise bows calculated to indicate exact degrees of respect based on relative rank. Their conversations followed predictable patterns, each exchange bound by rules Marcus had spent months learning. It was beautiful in its precision. It was also, he thought privately, rather sad. The encounter. The moment Princess Lyria entered, the entire atmosphere shifted. She was taller than most Valorians, moving with a grace that suggested both confidence and careful practice. Her robes were deep violet, almost black, embroidered with silver patterns that Marcus recognized as royal insignia. Her skin currently displayed the palest blue, so light it was almost white, the color of perfect emotional control and formal distance. But it was her eyes that caught Marcus's attention. Even from across the room he could see something behind the formal mask. The careful positioning of her attendants created a sphere of isolation around her. Everyone maintained exactly the prescribed distance. Every interaction followed precise protocol. She was surrounded by hundreds of people and completely, utterly alone. Marcus had seen that kind of loneliness before. He'd experienced it himself during his early years in the diplomatic corps, when everyone saw his role rather than his person, when every conversation was filtered through professional boundaries that prevented genuine connection. Princess Lyria moved through the crowd like a ghost at her own party. Representatives from various human colonies approached her with careful formal greetings that she received with equally careful formal responses. Everything was correct. Nothing was real. Her attendants whispered updates to her constantly. Her security detail maintained vigilant perimeter. Her diplomatic advisor stood 2 steps behind her left shoulder, ready to intervene if any interaction threatened to become improper. The princess herself navigated it all with flawless precision, her skin remaining that pale, controlled blue even as her eyes suggested something quite different. Marcus watched as a human ambassador, Senator Rodriguez from the Mars colony, approached with a formal greeting that he'd clearly practiced extensively. The senator's Valerian pronunciation was careful but accented. His bow was exactly the right depth for greeting royalty. His words followed the traditional format perfectly. Princess Lyria's response was equally perfect. She acknowledged his greeting with appropriate warmth, which in Valerian terms meant polite but distant. She expressed formal pleasure at humanity's presence at the summit. She hoped the proceedings would benefit both their peoples. Every word could have been scripted because in a sense they had been. Valerian diplomatic language had specific phrases for specific situations, and deviation was considered improper. Senator Rodriguez smiled broadly as he backed away, pleased with the successful interaction. Princess Lyria's skin remained pale blue, her expression serene and distant. Her eyes, Marcus noticed, held the weariness of someone who had performed this particular dance 10,000 times before. The crowd shifted, and suddenly Marcus found himself in her direct line of sight. Their eyes met across the room. The smile that changed everything. It wasn't conscious. Marcus didn't think about cultural protocols or diplomatic necessity or the 18 months of preparation. He simply saw another person who looked profoundly lonely and sad, surrounded by formal perfection but starving for genuine human, or in this case interspecies, connection. So he smiled. Not a diplomatic smile. Not the careful, measured expression he'd been taught to use in formal situations. Just a warm, genuine smile that said, "I see you. Not your title, not your role, not your diplomatic function. I see you as a person and I recognize that you're struggling." The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Princess Lyria stopped moving entirely. Her skin flashed through a rapid sequence of colors Marcus had never seen in any of his training materials, pale blue to soft gold to deep rose to brilliant amber, all cascading across her features in waves that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. Her eyes widened with what looked like shock, hope, disbelief, and something else Marcus couldn't identify. The room around them began to quiet, people noticing the princess's sudden stillness and dramatic color display. Her attendants stepped forward with concern. Her security detail tensed, hands moving toward weapons in case this represented some kind of threat. Her diplomatic advisor's face shifted through expressions of confusion and growing horror. Marcus felt his own smile falter as he realized something had gone terribly wrong. He'd clearly violated some protocol he didn't understand. His mind raced through his training, trying to identify what he'd done wrong, but nothing in his extensive preparation had suggested that a simple smile could cause this kind of reaction. Princess Lyria stared at him for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 seconds. Her skin continued its color display, settling finally into a warm golden tone that Marcus had learned indicated deep emotional response. Exactly the kind of emotional response Valorians were supposed to never show in public. Then she spoke, her voice carrying through the now silent hall with crystalline clarity. "I am Princess Lyria Solana of the Valerian Empire," she said, her words formal but her tone carrying undertones of emotion that seemed to shock everyone present. "And you are?" Marcus's brain struggled to process what was happening. The princess of the Valerian Empire was speaking directly to him, bypassing all normal diplomatic channels and formal introduction protocols. Everyone in the room was staring. His supervisor Director Williams was moving toward him with an expression that promised very uncomfortable conversations in the immediate future. But backing away now would make everything worse. Marcus forced himself to respond with as much formality as he could muster while his internal panic screamed. "Marcus Chin, Your Highness," he managed, executing what he hoped was an appropriate bow. "Xenocultural specialist for the Human Diplomatic Corps. I apologize if I've caused any offense through ignorance of proper protocol." Princess Lyria's skin flashed through colors again. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. Offense. Her tone held genuine bewilderment. "You have offered me recognition. You have seen me as I truly am, without the masks we all must wear. I am honored, not offended." The formal language created slight distance from what seemed to be powerful emotion, but her skin continued displaying that warm golden tone that suggested feelings running far deeper than her words indicated. Marcus had absolutely no idea what she meant by recognition, but before he could ask, before anyone could intervene, Princess Lyria made an announcement that transformed the entire situation from awkward misunderstanding to full diplomatic crisis. "I am honored to introduce Marcus Chin of the Human Diplomatic Corps," she said, her voice taking on ceremonial weight that silenced even the whispered conversations that had begun around the edges of the room. "He has today performed the sole recognition, offered freely and without obligation, in the presence of these assembled witnesses. By the ancient traditions of my people and before the eyes of all gathered here, I acknowledge this recognition and formally accept his proposal of eternal bonding." The silence that followed was absolute and terrible. The aftermath. Marcus stood frozen, his brain attempting and failing to process what had just happened. Sole recognition. Proposal. Eternal bonding. None of these terms had appeared in any of his training materials. None of this made any sense. The room erupted into barely contained chaos. Human diplomats frantically consulted their tablets. Valerian attendants surrounded their princess with urgent, whispered conversations. News drones that had been covering the summit suddenly focused all their attention on Marcus and Princess Lyria, broadcasting this moment to billions of viewers across dozens of worlds. Director Williams reached Marcus within seconds, her expression cycling through shock, horror, and professional damage control calculation. She pulled him aside with apologetic words to Princess Lyria that somehow maintained diplomatic courtesy while extracting Marcus from immediate proximity. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Williams demanded in a furious whisper once they'd moved to a relatively private corner. "Do you understand what a soul recognition means to the Valorians?" "The briefing materials didn't cover," Marcus began. "Because it's so rare and so sacred that most Valorians go their entire lives without witnessing one." Williams interrupted, her whisper becoming almost a hiss. "A soul recognition is when someone sees past all social masks and formal roles and acknowledges another person's true inner self. It's considered the deepest form of connection possible in Valerian culture." "But I just smiled at her," Marcus protested, still trying to understand. "It was just a friendly gesture because she looked isolated and sad." "A smile," Williams said, and her tone made those words sound like a death sentence. "A genuine, warm, unguarded smile offered to Valerian royalty without any hierarchical submission or political calculation. That's not just any friendly gesture. That's the soul recognition. That's the traditional first step in Valerian bonding rituals. That's essentially a marriage proposal in their culture." Marcus felt cold horror settling over him. "But I didn't know. I didn't mean." "Intent doesn't matter in cultural exchange," Williams cut him off. "Actions matter. You smiled at their princess in a way that her culture interprets as a proposal of eternal bonding. She has publicly accepted. And now the entire galaxy knows that a human specialist has initiated bonding protocols with Valerian royalty. Can we explain it was a mistake?" Marcus asked desperately. "Cultural misunderstanding?" Williams's expression became even grimmer. Explaining it was a mistake would constitute public rejection of her acceptance. Rejecting a Valerian royal who's publicly acknowledged a soul recognition would be considered profound dishonor, not just to her personally but to the entire Valerian Empire. It could destroy this entire summit, possibly restart conflicts that have been dormant for centuries. The political implications are catastrophic. "So what do I do? Right now?" You smile politely. "You don't make this worse. And you absolutely don't say or do anything that could be interpreted as rejection or mockery." Williams glanced back toward Princess Lyria, who was still surrounded by her agitated attendants. "Tomorrow we assemble every Valerian cultural expert we have and figure out how to navigate traditions you've accidentally invoked without causing an interstellar incident." Marcus watched Princess Lyria across the room. Her skin had settled into softer golden tones, and despite the chaos around her, despite the urgent whispered consultations from her attendants, she kept glancing in his direction. Her expression held something that looked like hope mixed with fear. He'd smiled at her because she looked lonely. He'd wanted to offer simple human kindness, a gesture that in his culture meant nothing more than friendly acknowledgement. And somehow, through complete ignorance of cultural context, he'd apparently just proposed marriage to an alien princess. The summit continued around them, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Every interaction now carried the weight of this unexpected development. Human representatives tried to maintain normal diplomatic proceedings while obviously distracted by the unprecedented situation. Valerian attendees seemed split between shock and fascination at witnessing such a rare cultural moment. Marcus spent the remainder of the reception in a state of carefully controlled panic. Every time he caught sight of Princess Lyria, her skin displayed those golden tones that suggested hope and happiness. She'd been isolated her entire life by rank and protocol, and he'd offered her recognition as an equal, something she'd probably never experienced before. Something so significant in her culture that it constituted a marriage proposal reserved for the most profound connections. All because of a smile. The impossible choice. The emergency briefing began at dawn station time. Marcus had spent a sleepless night watching his face appear on news feeds across the galaxy, accompanied by headlines like "Historic Human-Valorian Bonding" and "Diplomatic Specialist Proposes to Alien Princess," and his personal favorite, "Love at First Smile, Interspecies Romance Shock Summit." The conference room held a grim collection of humanity's best minds on Valerian culture. Director Williams presided over proceedings with the expression of someone managing a disaster. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the leading human expert on Valerian sociology, sat with stacks of research materials spread before her. Ambassador James Cooper, head of the human delegation, looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "Let me make sure I understand the situation correctly," Ambassador Cooper began, his voice tight with controlled stress. Marcus smiled at Princess Lyria. This smile is interpreted in Valerian culture as a soul recognition, which is essentially a marriage proposal. The princess has publicly accepted. And now we're trying to determine how to proceed without destroying the most important diplomatic summit in human history. That's accurate, Dr. Martinez confirmed. She pulled up cultural documentation on the conference room display. The soul recognition is extraordinarily rare in Valerian culture. Most Valorians never experience it. Their society values emotional control and formal hierarchy so strongly that genuinely seeing past social masks to acknowledge another person's true self is considered almost sacred. "Walk us through what Marcus has committed to," Williams requested. "What exactly does accepting a soul recognition mean?" Dr. Martinez highlighted relevant sections of her documentation. Valerian bonding has 4 traditional stages. First is the soul recognition, which Marcus performed when he smiled genuinely at Princess Lyria. Second is the sharing of time, where the recognized individuals spend regular, meaningful time together to determine compatibility. Third is the revelation of truth, where both parties reveal their deepest selves without any social masks or formal protection. Fourth is the eternal bond ceremony itself, which formalizes the commitment publicly. "And if Marcus simply refuses to proceed?" Ambassador Cooper asked. Dr. Martinez's expression became uncomfortable. Technically he has that right. Valerian bonding requires voluntary participation at each stage. But Princess Lyria publicly acknowledged his soul recognition in front of witnesses from dozens of worlds. If he now refuses to proceed, if he rejects her acknowledgement, that would constitute profound dishonor in Valerian culture. "How profound?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Profound enough to be considered a deliberate insult to the Valerian Empire," Dr. Martinez said carefully. "Profound enough that many Valorians would interpret it as humanity considering their royalty unworthy of genuine bonds. Profound enough to potentially destroy this summit and restart conflicts we've spent decades trying to resolve." Marcus felt the weight of impossible choices crushing down on him. "So my options are proceed with a bonding process I never intended to initiate with a princess I literally just met, or refuse and cause a diplomatic catastrophe that could affect billions of people across multiple worlds." "Those appear to be the primary options, yes," Dr. Martinez confirmed with evident sympathy. The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications. Marcus's entire life had been devoted to preventing exactly these kinds of cultural misunderstandings. Now he was at the center of the biggest one imaginable. "There might be a third option," Dr. Martinez said slowly, as if working through the idea even as she spoke. "The sharing of time stage requires regular, meaningful interaction to determine compatibility. Marcus could proceed with this stage, spend time with Princess Lyria, come to know her genuinely. Then, if they mutually determine they're incompatible, they could honorably conclude the bonding process without proceeding to the eternal bond." "Would that work within Valerian cultural framework?" Williams asked. "Mutual recognition of incompatibility after genuine attempt is different from immediate rejection without trying," Dr. Martinez explained. "If both parties conclude after spending time together that they're not suitable for eternal bonding, that's culturally acceptable. It's the refusing to try, the rejecting without genuine attempt, that would be considered dishonor." Ambassador Cooper leaned forward intently. "How long would this process take?" "Several months minimum," Dr. Martinez said. "The sharing of time isn't superficial. It requires genuine interaction, meaningful conversations, actual effort to know each other. They would need to spend regular time together, engage in authentic emotional exchange. This would be quite intimate even if the ultimate conclusion is that bonding isn't appropriate." Marcus processed this carefully. Several months of close interaction with an alien princess he'd just met, engaging in emotional intimacy designed to determine marriage compatibility, all while the galaxy watched and speculated. But the alternative was either committing to something he never chose or causing a diplomatic disaster with far-reaching consequences. "I need to speak with her," Marcus said finally. "Before making any decisions, I need to talk to Princess Lyria directly." The request was transmitted through formal diplomatic channels. Princess Lyria's response arrived within minutes. She would meet him in the station's botanical gardens at his earliest convenience. Marcus spent the intervening hour learning everything available about Princess Lyria specifically. She was 26 in Earth years, which Dr. Martinez explained was quite young for Valerian royalty to hold significant diplomatic responsibility. She'd inherited her position after her older brother died in a shuttle accident 3 years ago, suddenly thrust into duties she'd never been fully prepared to assume. Valerian royalty lived in almost complete isolation from normal social interaction. They were separated from casual society from early childhood, educated privately by carefully selected tutors, surrounded constantly by attendants who maintained strict hierarchical distance. The formal isolation Marcus had observed at the reception wasn't unusual for her. It was her entire lived experience. She's been profoundly lonely her entire life, Dr. Martinez explained during their final preparation conversation. Valerian culture respects royalty, honors them, even fears their authority. But royals are rarely seen as people. They're symbols, representatives, embodiments of tradition and power. Your smile, offering recognition without hierarchy, seeing her as a person rather than a symbol, that's something she's probably never experienced in her entire life. When Marcus arrived at the botanical gardens, Princess Lyria was already there, standing near a flowering plant that grew in carefully maintained biodomes throughout the station. She wore simpler robes than her formal ceremonial dress from the reception, though even her casual attire was clearly expensive and marked with symbols of her rank. Her skin currently displayed soft amber tones. Colors Dr. Martinez had taught him indicated nervous anticipation mixed with hope. "Your Highness," Marcus began with a formal greeting. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "Please," she said, her skin shifting slightly darker. "When we're alone you may call me Lyria." The constant formal address becomes exhausting. Marcus took a careful breath. "Lyria then. I need to be completely honest with you about what happened at the reception. I smiled at you because you looked isolated and lonely. It was meant as a simple gesture of kindness. I had absolutely no idea it would be interpreted as a soul recognition or any kind of proposal." Lyria's skin shifted through contemplative colors. "You saw me," she said quietly. "Not my title, not my diplomatic function, not the formal mask I must always wear. You looked at me and saw a person who was struggling, and you offered warmth without any political calculation. Do you regret this gesture?" "I regret not understanding the cultural implications," Marcus admitted. "I never intended to create diplomatic complications or put you in a difficult position. But I don't regret seeing you as a person rather than just a symbol." Her skin flashed with warmer tones. "I have lived my entire life surrounded by people who see the princess but never see Lyria. My attendants serve my role, not my person. My advisors counsel my position, not my heart. Diplomatic contacts interact with my function, not myself. You are the first person in my memory who looked past all of that and simply saw me. Is that why you accepted the soul recognition publicly?" Marcus asked. "To create a situation where I would have to continue seeing you that way?" Lyria's colors shifted to shades that suggested shame. "Partially, yes. I knew that if I acknowledged your recognition before witnesses, diplomatic necessity would compel you to maintain contact to avoid dishonor. It was..." She paused, searching for words. "It was manipulative. I used your ignorance and the political situation to secure something I desperately wanted. Companionship, recognition, someone treating me as an equal rather than a symbol. I'm not proud of that manipulation, even though I'm grateful for the result." Marcus appreciated her honesty, even as he processed the uncomfortable reality of how thoroughly he'd been maneuvered. "So where does that leave us?" "We're in the middle of a bonding process that started from my cultural ignorance and was extended through your strategic use of political necessity. I propose this," Lyria said, her skin showing determined golden tones. "We proceed with the sharing of time stage. We spend regular time together, come to know each other genuinely, without diplomatic masks or formal performances. At the end of several months, if we both conclude we're not compatible for eternal bonding, we can honorably part ways without dishonor to either side. The key is that we must make genuine effort. We must truly try to know each other. And if during this process we discover we actually are compatible?" Marcus asked. Lyria's colors blazed with vulnerable hope. "Then we would face a choice together. Proceed honestly with something that developed genuinely, or maintain our plan to conclude the bonding despite real connection. But that seems premature to worry about now." Marcus made his decision. "All right. We try. We go through the sharing of time stage honestly, spend time together, attempt to know each other genuinely. If at the end we both conclude we're not compatible, we part as friends without dishonor. Fair?" "Fair," Lyria agreed, her skin displaying joyful golden radiance. Thank you for being willing to try. For not immediately rejecting me. For continuing to see me as a person rather than just a political complication. They spent the next hour establishing parameters for their arrangement. They would meet regularly over the coming weeks. Walks through the gardens, shared meals, opportunities to know each other beyond formal roles. The meetings would be documented enough to satisfy public interest but private enough for genuine conversation. As Marcus prepared to leave, Lyria caught his hand. A gesture that made her attendants, who'd been maintaining discreet distance, shift with surprise. Physical contact was apparently rare in Valerian culture. Marcus, she said, her colors showing vulnerable honesty. I want you to know that while I did use the situation strategically, your smile truly did mean what I said it meant. The soul recognition is real in our culture. When someone looks past all social performance and sees the person beneath, that is sacred to my people. You weren't wrong to smile. I wasn't wrong to recognize it as something significant. The only complication is that neither of us expected where that moment would lead. Marcus squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Then let's see where it leads together. Honestly. Without expectations but with genuine effort. He left the gardens aware that his life had changed irrevocably. For the next several months he would be spending close time with an alien princess, engaging in emotional intimacy that her culture considered sacred, all while billions watched and speculated about whether humanity's first interspecies royal bonding would succeed or fail. All because he'd smiled at someone who looked lonely. But as he reviewed their conversation, remembered Lyria's honest admission of manipulation mixed with genuine need, saw again the hopeful colors in her skin that suggested both fear and anticipation, Marcus found himself thinking that maybe the next several months wouldn't be entirely terrible. She was intelligent, surprisingly direct about her own motivations. Clearly lonely in ways he understood from his own experiences of isolation. If he had to spend time with someone while navigating impossible diplomatic situations, there were worse companions than a brilliant and honest princess who desperately needed someone to see her as a person. The smile that started everything had been instinctive kindness. Perhaps what followed could become something equally genuine, even if it began through misunderstanding and diplomatic necessity. Understanding and connection. The private meeting. 3 weeks had passed since the reception, and Marcus's life had become something he never could have imagined. Every morning began with messages from news outlets requesting interviews. Every evening ended with diplomatic briefings about public perception management. And in between he spent hours with Princess Lyria, gradually discovering that the lonely woman behind the royal mask was far more complex and fascinating than he'd anticipated. Their meetings had developed a comfortable rhythm. Morning walks through the botanical gardens where they could speak freely without the pressure of formal observation. Shared lunches in quiet sections of the station where the ambient noise provided privacy despite the ever-present security details. Evening conversations in observation lounges where they watched stars together and talked about everything except politics and protocol. Today's meeting was different. Lyria had requested they speak somewhere truly private, away from attendance and security and the constant awareness of being observed. After extensive negotiations with both their respective teams, they'd been granted 2 hours alone in a secure conference room, one of the few spaces on the station that wasn't monitored for security purposes. Marcus arrived first, his nerves evident even to himself. 3 weeks of regular interaction had transformed Lyria from the alien princess I accidentally proposed to, into someone he genuinely looked forward to seeing. She was brilliant, with insights about interspecies relations that came from years of careful observation. She was funny in unexpected ways, her humor dry and self-deprecating when she let her formal mask drop. And she was profoundly lonely in ways that became more visible the more time they spent together. When Lyria entered, her skin displayed deeper blue tones than usual, colors Marcus had learned indicated serious contemplation mixed with anxiety. She'd abandoned her formal robes entirely today, wearing simple clothing that made her look younger and somehow more vulnerable. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "I needed to speak with you honestly, without the awareness that every word might be recorded or analyzed or broadcast to billions of viewers." "I'm glad you asked," Marcus replied. "I've been wanting to have a conversation that wasn't filtered through diplomatic necessity." Lyria's colors shifted through contemplative shades. "These past 3 weeks have been remarkable for me. I've spent more time in genuine conversation with you than I have with anyone else in my entire life. You ask questions about my thoughts, not just my opinions on policy. You laugh at my observations not because protocol demands appropriate response but because you find them genuinely amusing. You see me as Lyria, not just as Princess Lyria Solana. You make it easy, Marcus said honestly. Once I got past the terror of having accidentally proposed marriage to alien royalty, I discovered someone I actually enjoy spending time with. That's what I need to discuss, Lyria said, her skin flashing with vulnerable golden tones. Our agreement was to proceed through the sharing of time stage and then mutually conclude we're incompatible if that proves true. But Marcus, I'm not certain that conclusion is honest anymore. Marcus felt his heart rate increase. What do you mean? I mean that I think I'm falling for you, Lyria said, her colors blazing with emotional honesty that would have been shocking in any public setting. These conversations we share, the laughter, the moments when you challenge my assumptions or share your own vulnerabilities, these aren't diplomatic performances for me anymore. They're real. You're real. And what I feel when I'm with you is more genuine than anything I've experienced in my life. Marcus sat with this revelation, examining his own feelings carefully. I'd be lying if I said I haven't been developing real feelings too. You're not what I expected. You're not the isolated princess performing diplomatic duty. You're someone with depth and humor and insight that I find genuinely compelling. But, Lyria prompted, reading the hesitation in his tone. But this entire situation started from my ignorance, Marcus continued. I smiled at you without understanding what it meant. You accepted that smile publicly, which you've admitted was strategically motivated. We're spending time together partly because diplomatic necessity demands it. How do we know what we feel is genuine rather than just the result of circumstances forcing us together? Lyria's colors shifted through thoughtful shades. That's a fair question. But consider this. The circumstances that brought us together may have been accidental and politically motivated, but the conversations we've had weren't forced. The laughter we've shared wasn't manufactured. The understanding that's developed between us wasn't programmed by diplomatic protocol. You're right, Marcus acknowledged. But there's still the enormous complication that you're a princess of a galactic empire and I'm a mid-level cultural specialist. Even if what we feel is real, the practical implications of actually pursuing this are overwhelming. Learning about each other. Lyria stood and moved to the window, looking out at the stars beyond. Her skin displayed colors Marcus had learned to recognize as vulnerability mixed with determination. Let me tell you about my life, she said quietly. Not the official biography that appears in diplomatic briefings, but the actual experience of being Valerian royalty. Marcus remained silent, sensing she needed to speak without interruption. I was separated from my parents when I was 6 years old, Lyria began. Not because they didn't love me. Valerian royalty does experience parental affection, though we express it differently than humans. But because tradition demands that royal children be educated in complete isolation to preserve what our culture calls purity of perspective. The theory is that royalty must understand tradition and duty without the corruption of common social influence. Her colors darkened. In practice, it means I was raised in a beautiful prison. My tutors were brilliant but distant. They taught me history, diplomacy, science, art, every subject a royal should master. But every interaction was filtered through hierarchy. Every conversation was an educational opportunity, not a genuine exchange. I learned everything about Valerian culture except how to actually connect with another Valerian. That sounds incredibly isolating, Marcus said softly. It was, Lyria confirmed. My brother, her colors flashed with grief. He was 8 years older than me. Sometimes he would visit during my education. Those were the only times I experienced something like normal social interaction. He would tell me jokes that horrified our tutors. He would ask about my actual thoughts, not just my understanding of proper protocol. He made me feel like a person rather than a symbol being prepared for duty. What happened to him? Marcus asked gently, though he already knew from the briefings. Shuttle accident 3 years ago, Lyria said, her colors displaying deep sorrow. Mechanical failure that couldn't be prevented or predicted. He died instantly. And I inherited responsibilities I'd never been fully prepared to assume, because I was the spare heir, the backup in case something happened to the primary. Suddenly I was thrust into diplomatic duties, public ceremonies, political decisions that affected millions of lives. And I had to perform all of it alone, without the one person who'd ever seen me as more than a symbol. She turned back to face Marcus, her colors shifting to determined gold. When you smiled at me at the reception, when you looked at me and saw someone who was struggling rather than a princess performing her duties, that was the first time since my brother died that anyone had acknowledged me as a person. That's why I accepted your soul recognition publicly. Not just strategic manipulation, though that was part of it. but genuine, desperate hope that I might have found someone else who could see past the crown. Marcus crossed the room to stand beside her at the window. I'm sorry you've experienced that loneliness. No one should have to live in that kind of isolation. What about you? Lyria asked, her colors shifting to curious amber. You've been learning about my life, but I know relatively little about yours beyond what appears in official records. Tell me about Marcus Chin, not the cultural specialist but the actual person. Marcus considered how to explain. My story is less dramatic than yours, but it has its own loneliness. I grew up in a colony world, New Sol, orbiting a star 40 light-years from Earth. My parents were first-generation colonists, and they sacrificed everything to give me opportunities they never had. They wanted me to succeed, to justify their sacrifices, to prove that leaving Earth had been worth it. That sounds like considerable pressure, Lyria observed. It was, Marcus agreed. I was brilliant at academics because failure would have dishonored their sacrifice. I specialized in xenocultural studies because it was practical and prestigious. I excelled at understanding alien cultures because being the best was the only acceptable option. And somewhere in all that achievement, I forgot to actually develop genuine connections with people. I had colleagues but not friends. Professional relationships but nothing deeper. I was surrounded by people who saw my accomplishments but not my actual self. His expression grew more thoughtful. When I saw you at the reception, isolated despite being surrounded by hundreds of representatives, I recognized that particular kind of loneliness. The feeling of being visible but not seen, acknowledged but not known. That's why I smiled. Not because of any cultural protocol, but because I understood what you were experiencing. Lyria's colors softened to warm golden tones. So we're both people who've spent our lives being seen for our roles rather than ourselves. Seems like it, Marcus confirmed. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars beyond the window. After a long moment, Lyria spoke again. I want to show you something, she said, her colors shifting nervously. Something I've never shown anyone except my brother. She raised her hand and her skin began to change. Not the subtle shifts Marcus had learned to recognize, but dramatic, flowing transformations. Colors cascaded across her features in complex patterns. Deep blues flowing into brilliant golds, soft ambers transforming into vibrant roses, all moving in intricate designs that seemed almost like visual poetry. This is emotional expression without control, Lyria explained, her voice soft. Valorians are taught from childhood to suppress these displays. Showing uncontrolled color shifts is considered deeply inappropriate, almost obscene in our culture. But my brother taught me that sometimes, in private, with someone you trust completely, you can let the control drop and simply feel without filtering. The patterns were breathtaking. Marcus watched waves of color flow across her skin, each shade and movement expressing emotions more eloquently than words ever could. Joy, sorrow, hope, fear, affection, all displayed in living color. It's beautiful, Marcus breathed. Lyria's colors flashed with pleased embarrassment. You're the first person besides my brother who's ever seen this. The first person I've trusted enough to show this level of vulnerability. Thank you for trusting me, Marcus said sincerely. The media storm. The following day their private meeting became very public knowledge. Not the content of their conversation. The room had been truly secure, but the fact that they'd met alone for 2 hours generated enormous media speculation. Marcus's communication device exploded with notifications. News feeds across the human sphere ran headlines like "Royal Bonding Intensifies," and "Princess and Specialist Share Private Meeting," and "Is this true love or political theater?" The Valerian media was equally intense, though their coverage focused more on analyzing every public interaction for signs of genuine emotional connection. Valerian culture might value emotional control, but that didn't mean they weren't fascinated by royal bonding processes. This was the first time in living memory that a Valerian royal was bonding with someone from another species, and the public interest was unprecedented. Marcus met with his team for damage control briefings that felt increasingly absurd. Public perception is generally positive, Director Williams reported, reviewing polling data. 73% of humans surveyed support the bonding process. 81% believe your feelings are genuine. There's considerable romantic interest in the story. People like the narrative of accidental connection developing into real relationship. And the Valerian public? Marcus asked. More divided, Dr. Martinez answered. Traditional Valorians are uncomfortable with cross-species bonding, especially involving royalty. But younger Valorians and those more integrated into galactic culture are fascinated. Princess Lyria has become something of a romantic figure. the isolated royal who found unexpected connection. The summit itself is proceeding remarkably well, Ambassador Cooper added. Having a human-Valorian bonding process happening simultaneously with diplomatic negotiations has created unusual goodwill. Both sides are motivated to make the summit succeed as a demonstration that our species can build genuine connections. So the political situation has actually improved because of this relationship? Marcus asked, finding the irony almost painful. Substantially, Cooper confirmed, which creates its own pressure. If the bonding process fails, if you and Princess Lyria publicly conclude you're incompatible, that could damage the diplomatic progress we've achieved. Marcus felt the weight of that pressure settling over him. So now there are political motivations for the relationship to succeed, which makes it even harder to determine what's genuine feeling versus what's convenient diplomatic theater. The briefing continued for another hour, covering public relations strategies and media management approaches. By the end, Marcus felt exhausted by the complexity of trying to develop genuine feelings while billions of people watched and analyzed every interaction. His friend Jennifer, another cultural specialist who'd known him for years, cornered him after the briefing. "You're falling for her," Jennifer observed bluntly. "I've known you since academy training. I've never seen you this invested in another person." "It's complicated," Marcus protested weakly. "It's not that complicated," Jennifer countered. "Yes, the situation started through misunderstanding. Yes, there's enormous political pressure. Yes, the media attention is overwhelming. But underneath all that complexity, you have genuine feelings for her, and from everything I've observed, she has genuine feelings for you. The question is whether you'll let the complicated circumstances prevent you from pursuing something real." Marcus wanted to deny it, but Jennifer knew him too well. Even if what we feel is genuine, the practical implications are overwhelming. If we complete the bonding, my entire life changes. I'd be consort to Valerian royalty. I'd have diplomatic responsibilities I never trained for. I'd be under constant public scrutiny forever. That's not what I signed up for when I smiled at someone who looked lonely. "Nothing worth having comes without complications," Jennifer said gently. "The question isn't whether pursuing this relationship would be complicated. Obviously it would be. The question is whether what you've found with Lyria is worth navigating those complications." Growing feelings. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Lyria's relationship deepened in ways that surprised them both. Their conversations ranged across philosophy, art, science, personal fears, and future hopes. They discovered unexpected common ground despite their radically different backgrounds. Lyria was passionate about social reform within Valerian society. "Our culture's emphasis on emotional control and hierarchical distance creates unnecessary suffering," she explained during one of their garden walks. "People are isolated from genuine connection. Royalty especially are trapped by traditions that prevent us from experiencing normal relationships. If I have any power as princess, I want to use it to change those traditions." Marcus found himself inspired by her vision. "That's remarkably progressive for someone raised in complete isolation." "My brother planted those seeds," Lyria said, her colors showing affectionate remembrance. "He questioned traditions constantly. He made me think about whether the way things have always been done is actually the way things should be done. He believed that royalty had responsibility not just to uphold tradition but to improve it." They also discovered shared interests that had nothing to do with diplomacy or cultural exchange. Both loved music, though their species' musical traditions were radically different. Both enjoyed strategic games, and their competitive matches of various board games had become a regular feature of their time together. Both had somewhat dark senses of humor that emerged once they were comfortable enough to drop formal masks. "I've been thinking about what you said," Marcus told her one evening as they sat in an observation lounge watching a nebula slowly rotate beyond the window. "About questioning traditions and using power to create positive change. That's not typical thinking for someone in your position." "My position has given me unique perspective," Lyria replied. "I've experienced the cost of traditions that prioritize hierarchy over connection. I felt the loneliness that comes from being isolated by formal protocol. If I can use my royal status to change those traditions, maybe my brother's death and my unexpected rise to these responsibilities will have meant something positive." "You'd face enormous resistance," Marcus observed. "Traditional Valorians won't appreciate royalty questioning established customs." "I know," Lyria acknowledged, her colors showing determined gold. "But having you in my life has shown me that connection across differences is possible. If a human cultural specialist and a Valerian princess can find genuine understanding, maybe our societies can learn to value connection over rigid hierarchy." Marcus felt something shift in his chest as he listened to her speak. This wasn't the manipulative princess he'd feared she might be. This was someone with genuine vision and courage, someone willing to use her position to create meaningful change despite the personal cost. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said, making a decision. "I've been struggling with determining what's genuine feeling versus what's circumstantial pressure. But listening to you now, seeing your passion for creating positive change, witnessing your courage and questioning traditions that have shaped your entire life, I realize that what I feel for you isn't about circumstances or political pressure. It's about who you actually are." Lyria's colors blazed with hopeful gold. "What are you saying?" Lyria's colors blazed with joy. "Then we proceed to the revelation of truth stage. We stop pretending this is purely diplomatic theater and start engaging honestly with what's actually developing between us. We prepare for the eternal bond if that's where genuine feelings lead us." "Your people will have opinions," Marcus observed. "Traditional Valorians won't be happy about their princess bonding with a human." "Let them have opinions," Lyria said with fierce determination. "I've spent my entire life living according to what tradition demands. I've performed my role flawlessly, maintained proper emotional control, upheld hierarchical distance as protocol requires. And it made me profoundly lonely and isolated. For once in my life, I'm choosing connection over tradition. I'm choosing love over political convenience. I'm choosing you, Marcus, because what we have is more valuable than maintaining traditions that create suffering." Marcus felt the weight of that declaration, the courage it represented. "Are you sure? Once we make this public, once we announce we're proceeding to the eternal bond, there's no going back without enormous consequences." "I'm certain," Lyria said, her colors showing unwavering determination. "Are you?" Marcus thought about his life before that reception. Professional success but personal isolation. Colleagues but not friends. Accomplishment but not connection. He thought about what these weeks with Lyria had shown him. The possibility of genuine understanding across vast differences, the joy of being seen and known rather than just professionally appreciated, the courage of someone willing to question traditions that created suffering. "I'm certain," he confirmed. The public declaration. The joint press conference was scheduled for the following day. Marcus and Lyria stood together before representatives from hundreds of worlds, their presence broadcast to billions of viewers across the galaxy. Lyria spoke first, her colors showing calm determination. "3 weeks ago, Marcus Chin offered me the sole recognition, seeing past formal roles to acknowledge my genuine self. I accepted this recognition publicly. What followed was the sharing of time, where we came to know each other honestly. Today, I am pleased to announce that we are proceeding to the revelation of truth and will complete the eternal bond ceremony within the month." The room erupted with questions. Lyria raised her hand for silence. "I know this bonding is unprecedented. A Valerian princess bonding with a human is certainly unconventional by our traditional standards. But Marcus has shown me that genuine connection across differences is not just possible, it's valuable. He has challenged me to question traditions that create isolation and suffering. He has seen me not as a symbol to be respected from distance, but as a person to be known and loved. That kind of recognition is what the soul recognition celebrates, and I am honored to complete this bond." Marcus spoke next, his voice steady despite his awareness that billions of people were watching. "I didn't understand the cultural implications when I smiled at Lyria at the reception. But what I've discovered in the weeks since has been more valuable than anything I could have anticipated. Lyria is brilliant, courageous, compassionate, and committed to creating positive change despite personal cost. What we've found together is genuine, and I'm honored to proceed with the eternal bond." The questions continued for over an hour. Both human and Valerian reporters wanted details about their relationship, their future plans, how they would navigate cultural differences, what this meant for diplomatic relations between their species. Through it all, Marcus and Lyria stood together, their hands joined, their answers honest and direct. Yes, the situation began through cultural misunderstanding. Yes, there had been strategic considerations initially. But what developed was genuine connection that both of them chose to pursue despite complications. Director Williams stood at the back of the room, watching with an expression that mixed professional satisfaction with personal happiness. Ambassador Cooper looked pleased with the diplomatic implications. Dr. Martinez seemed thrilled at witnessing such a significant cross-cultural development. As the press conference concluded, Marcus and Lyria exited together through a side corridor, finally alone except for minimal security presence. "We really did it," Marcus said, feeling the weight of public declaration settling over him. "We did," Lyria confirmed, her colors blazing with happy gold. No more pretending it's political theater. No more holding back genuine feelings to avoid complications. We've chosen each other honestly, and whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Marcus pulled her close, and Lyria's uncontrolled colors flowed across her skin in patterns that expressed joy, love, hope, and determination, all cascading together. For someone from a culture that valued emotional control, letting those colors flow freely was the ultimate demonstration of trust and vulnerability. "I love you," Marcus said simply. "I love you too," Lyria replied, her colors pulsing with each word. "My brother would have liked you. He would have approved of someone willing to see past tradition to find genuine connection." They stood together in the quiet corridor, knowing that the weeks ahead would bring enormous challenges. The eternal bond ceremony would require extensive preparation. They would face resistance from traditional Valorians uncomfortable with cross-species bonding. Marcus would need training in diplomatic protocols he'd never imagined needing. Their relationship would face constant public scrutiny. But they would face it all together, building something genuine from circumstances that began with a simple smile. Closing, planning their future. 2 weeks later, Marcus and Lyria sat in the botanical gardens where they'd had their first honest conversation. The eternal bond ceremony was scheduled for the following week. Preparations were extensive, combining Valerian traditional elements with human influences to create something unprecedented. "Nervous?" Lyria asked, her colors showing curious amber mixed with her own anticipation. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "I'm about to participate in a ceremony that will fundamentally change my entire life. I'll be consort to Valerian royalty, with responsibilities I barely understand and public scrutiny that will never end. But also," he squeezed her hand gently, "also incredibly happy. Because I'm doing this with you, and what we've built together is worth any complication." "My advisors have been preparing briefing materials about your new role," Lyria said with amusement. "Apparently being royal consort involves considerably more formal duty than I initially suggested." "I'm discovering that," Marcus said wryly. "But I've also been learning about possibilities for positive influence. As royal consort, I'll have platforms for advocacy that I never had as a cultural specialist. We can work together on the social reforms you're passionate about, changing traditions that create isolation, building connections across cultural boundaries, demonstrating that genuine relationships can bridge enormous differences." Lyria's colors softened to warm gold. "You've been thinking about this seriously." "Of course I have," Marcus replied. "If I'm going to be consort to Valerian royalty, I want to use that position meaningfully. Your brother questioned traditions and pushed for positive change. Maybe we can continue that work together." "He really would have liked you," Lyria said softly. "He believed that royalty had responsibility not just to maintain tradition but to improve it. You understand that instinctively." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching flowers bloom in the carefully maintained biodomes around them. Across the galaxy, billions of people followed their story with fascination. The unprecedented bonding between human specialist and Valerian princess had captured public imagination in ways neither of them had anticipated. "Whatever comes next," Marcus said finally, "whatever challenges we face as we build a life together across cultural boundaries, I want you to know that I don't regret that smile. Not for a moment. It brought me to you, and you've shown me possibilities I never imagined. And you've shown me what it means to be seen and known rather than just respected from distance," Lyria replied, her colors blazing with love. "You've given me connection when I'd accepted that isolation was simply the cost of being royal. That's worth more than I can express in words." The eternal bond ceremony the following week was beautiful, combining Valerian tradition with human elements to create something unique. Marcus and Lyria stood before representatives from both their worlds, formally pledging partnership that was simultaneously personal and political. When Lyria performed the traditional Valerian bonding gesture, allowing her colors to flow completely uncontrolled as the ultimate demonstration of trust and vulnerability, the assembled witnesses gasped at the unprecedented display. Royal Valorians never showed such emotional openness publicly. But Lyria had decided that if she was creating new traditions, she would start by demonstrating that genuine emotion wasn't weakness to be hidden but strength to be celebrated. Marcus responded with the human tradition of a kiss, gentle and filled with promise. The joining of their two traditions, their two species, their two lives into something new and unprecedented. As they exited the ceremony together, bonded by traditions old and new, Marcus thought back to that reception weeks ago. He'd smiled at a lonely princess because kindness was the right response to another person's suffering. That simple gesture, offered without understanding or intention, had transformed both their lives in ways neither could have anticipated. Sometimes the most important connections begin with nothing more than recognition, seeing another person truly, acknowledging their humanity or in this case, their personhood, offering warmth without calculation or expectation. The smile that started everything had been instinctive kindness. What followed? Love, partnership, commitment to building something meaningful together despite enormous complications. That was choice. The best choice Marcus had ever made. Hand in hand with his bonded partner, surrounded by well-wishers from two worlds, Marcus walked forward into a future he'd never planned but wouldn't trade for anything. Because he'd found something more valuable than career success or political accomplishment. He'd found genuine connection. He'd found love. He'd found someone who saw him as completely as he saw her. And it all started with a smile.